24 issue, the storage issue. Overall, it's a really simple project. The only thing that's at all tricky is the joint. So this is a mock-up that I've done. A little notch in the leg. This will be solid wood in the real piece. This is just a mock-up. And a little notch in the shelf. A bit of a round over to help make things look a little bit better, help it to go better, easier as well. Together, easier as well. And it looks pretty good. And so I'm going to take you through some of the steps just to get everyone pointed in the right direction. So the first thing I did was take care of the verticals. They're all solid wood. And I clamped them together so that even if you do mess up the spacing, they'll all be the same and they'll still work. So I referenced off the one end each time and clamped them together, used a dado set to run the groove. And this groove is exactly the thickness of a piece of the shelf material, which in my case is Baltic birch ply. You want it to be not too tight and also not too loose. So when you put them together, there's strength there, but you don't have to force them together. As you can imagine, when you're trying to assemble this, all the different shelves and all the different legs at the same time, you don't want them to be a little bit hard each joint, because that will amplify the whole thing will be really hard. So this is me cross-cutting the grooves in the solid wood legs. You can see I have everything clamped together. I'm using my my miter gauge to bring everything across the saw. So here I have all the shelves for the unit. Now in my mock-up here, I machined this on edge with my on the table saw and just went across the blade to remove that. But it's a lot harder to do that when you're dealing with 8-foot long sheets. So instead of bringing the material to the saw and moving the material, I'm bringing the tool to the material and moving the tool. In that case, it's going to be a router. So I'm going to make up a guide that a flush trim router bit can be traced on, that can trace on and create this groove after I use a handsaw to remove the material from there. So although you can't really see it, the first thing I did after these are cut to size is mark some pencil lines for the center point of each leg. So there, I've all referenced off one end, and I've been very careful. This is very important that you don't mess up these pencil lines. As long as they're all in the right spot, you'll be fine. Okay, so this is the template I've made on the table saw. Standing it on edge, running it through until the exact width of this works and gives me the width that I need to accept the shelf. A little bit of trial and error there. If it's too tight, just take a fraction of an inch more off that, try it again, and go from there. So I have my mark here. That's the center line of my of where the leg needs to join. I have a center line here. Line them up. I'm accurate with this. It's good. Give it a quick mark. So there I have my mark. I'm going to take a saw and cut that out. Now I could use this directly from here to route, but it's a fair bit of material to remove with the flush trim bit, the template bit, sorry. So I'm going to take my saw, make 2 cuts down, and then take a fret saw or a coping saw just to cut across the bottom. Doesn't have to be perfect, we're just trying to remove the majority of the waste. Okay, now that that's done, we can move on. Now the reason I actually used a bandsaw to cut this in the first place on my mock-up, but a big piece like this I just logistically can't use my bandsaw to cut, so that's why I use the hand saws. So we have everything lined up here, still have the marks, and if you line this up accurately, this is where you have to be accurate. You don't want this to be shifted over even an eighth of an inch, because the leg will have to align with all the parts above it and below it. So try to be accurate here. So once you have it positioned, clamp it in place. And now I can use my router template bit. So there's a bearing, and the bit will machine that waste, and the bearing will run against the template. That's the first one done. Now I just have to repeat that a bunch more times. So at this point it is a functioning joint. The two parts can slide together and the leg will support the shelf. I still want to put a round over on both of these edges, as well as a round over on the plywood shelf on this inner edge, so it kind of scoops back in and it adds a nice little visual detail. So when working with all these pieces, it's nice if you can gang them together for speed, for quality. So this is how I've routed the inner corners here. Line them all up. This is an offcut from one of the legs that I've beveled the edges just slightly. You won't be able to see it, but that bevel allows that piece to slide in there reasonably easy. And if I make sure that the front edges are all lined up, and then clamp these down, and one more tip, when I use the router, I'm going to route this edge upward like this. It's going to blow out that top. So I just added a piece of scrap. This is actually my template. On top of that. And another clamp. Route that down. At that point, I can go ahead and route that edge. There you have it. No tear out at all. And they're all done. Now I can repeat for the other side. There we have it, both sides done. While they're here and all lined up, I'm even going to give them a bit of sand. Okay, the last thing to do for these legs is add a round over on the two front corners. That'll give sort of a bullnose effect, just sort of soften the effect overall. So I've got my round over bit in here, it's all set up, put my protection on, and away we go. tip here for setting up the fence in relation to where the bit is for this pass, and for many other passes as well. Most people will want to set this up flush with the fence, so the face of the outer quadrant of the bearing is in line with the fence. I do this sometimes, but if I'm not routing the entire face of the piece, I do it slightly differently. So this is the first pass already made on this side, and I routed until about this line here. So that's about, I'm going to say 40% of the width. So when I end friend the piece and I route it on the other side, I'm going to get this 40% of the piece. Leaves this center section here that the bearing can still run on. If I'm going to route the whole edge off, this method doesn't usually work very well. But watch what happens. You start off with the workpiece in contact with the fence, and if the workpiece is perfectly straight, this is all for naught. But workpieces are rarely perfectly straight, and I get tired of forcing them into the fence just to flex them and force them in just so I get an even cut. So if you leave the bearing proud by a 32nd, maybe even a 16th at most, it comes in contact here, but as you move along and once the workpiece touches the bearing, it opens up a little bit there. So you still have the stability of the table, and you still have the stability of and safety of the fence, so you can't push your hand into the route a bit as easily. You can't. You can more easily start the cut, but when it pushes the workpiece, when the bearing pushes the workpiece slightly away from the fence, you get a much more even cut all the way along. Even if this workpiece is slightly, slightly not straight, which is often the case, right? So there you have it. A couple options for you to think about. So everything's all done now. Got everything assembled, loaded up with books. It's as strong as can be. The joint itself, slightly complex to make, but overall the bookcase project was pretty easy, and it's huge, it's functional, and I think it's beautiful. Any questions about it, let me know. Happy woodworking.